Welcome. We are talking about Federalist number 51. So we are talking about the Federalist Papers, right? And we know that the Federalist Papers were written to basically drum up support for this new Constitution, right? We know that the new Constitution has been proposed. It's being submitted to the states for their approval. And we know that 9 out of 13 states have to ratify the Constitution in order for it to go into effect. Okay, so this is the support. This is the reason why we should ratify the Constitution, right? So it is Federalist number 10. Federalist number 10 is all about factions and allowing multiple factions in this large republic to best control the effects of factions. That if we allow a lot of factions to compete amongst each other, then it's going to help prevent the evils of factions, right? Our whole thing in the Federalist Papers and the argument of Brutus, right? The argument of Brutus, the anti-Federalist response is that this large republic is going to infringe on the liberties and rights of the people. This is the argument that it's not going to infringe on the rights and liberties of the people, right? That factions will, Federalist number 10, of course, if we allow a lot of factions to compete against each other, then the factions will dilute power, right? If we're worried about majority rule and we're worried about the majority having too much power, well, then you allow a lot of factions to you kind of dilute the majority into different groups. And by doing so, you're going to dilute the power of the majority. So Federalist 51, basically what Madison or Hamilton, many people believe Madison, so we're going with Madison, but what Madison or Hamilton are saying is the very first sentence of the paper, right? He's saying that the practice, to what expedient then shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among the several departments? So we're talking about the necessary partition of power, division of power, right? This separation. We're going to take the powers of government, we're going to separate it into 3 different branches, right? And the only answer that can be given is that all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate. The effect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of government, the branches of government, the powers of government, as that its several constituent parts may, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. Great. So we're talking about the partition of power, the separation of powers, and we're also talking about the branches being able to keep the means of keeping each other in their proper places, also known as checks and balances, right? So we scroll down here a little bit. That's basically the first paragraph. That's what we're talking about. Okay. Sorry. Scroll here. This is Brutus. Wrong document. Keeps going down. I'm sorry. We'll get down to it. In order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty. Okay, the separate and distinct exercise of different powers, separation of powers, is essential to the preservation of liberty. It's evident that each department should have its own a will of its own. Okay, so what we're really talking about here is that each branch will be independent from each other. Okay, the 3 branches will be independent. They will be separate branches. They will have their own powers, but yet they'll also have the powers to keep the other branches in check. Right? Legislative branch is tasked with passing laws. The executive branch is tasked with carrying out those laws, and the judicial branch is tasked with interpreting those laws. And he goes on to talk about the peculiar qualifications. So here he's talking about the judicial branch. Okay, and why the judicial branch is a little bit different. First of all, the judicial branch, he doesn't believe that they should be intertwined in the appointment of each other. But the judicial branch is a little bit different because of their independence, because of their removal from political pressure. He believes it's very important to remove that power from the people and give it to president, right, the power of the president to appoint those judges, and also the power of the Senate to confer them, okay, to accept those judges. One of the most important, probably the best known phrase from Federalist 51 is ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of this place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices shall be necessary to control the abuse of the government. So it is necessary, right? It's human nature for these checks and balances, right? They're necessary because men aren't perfect and men governing governments aren't perfect and men governing governments are not perfect. Okay. So we must, ambition, right, is a person's will, a person's desire, right? An ambition, a will or desire must be made to counteract others' wills or desires. And that's basically what he's talking about. He's talking about a system of checks and balances. It's human nature, right? You can't argue against human nature. And he goes on to say, this is very important also. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external or internal controls on government would be necessary. But we know men are not perfect, men are not angels, and therefore we do need a system of checks and balances. Okay, he's going on to talk about in a single republic and one republic, right? There's basically the check is checks and balances or separation of powers. Okay, here he's talking about the current Republican government, the new Constitution, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. So the remedy for this inconveniency basically was thought to be that the national government, or I'm sorry, the national legislature, Congress, was the most dominant branch of government. They held the most powers, right? The enumerated powers given in Article 1, power to make laws, power to tax, right? All those are really important. The necessary and proper clause is mentioned in Brutus number 1. So what are you going to do with the legislative branch, right? You're going to divide it into two. You're going to create a bicameral legislature. So basically taking that most powerful branch and dividing it into two separate parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate, is going to split the power of the most powerful branch, making it less powerful, he argues. An absolute negative. So here he's talking about checks and balances. He's talking about the power of the president to veto laws passed by Congress and the power of Congress to override those vetoes. So he's talking about specific checks and balances. Here, in a compound Republic of America, now he's going on. Okay, so here what he's going to say, he's going to talk about a double check, right? He's already talked about one check in the Constitution. You take the most powerful branch, you divide it into two. And now he's talking about federalism, and he's also talking about this a series of checks and balances. So in the compound Republic of America, the current Constitution, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments. A federalism. He's talking about you take the power of government, you give some of it to the national government, you give some of it to the state government. You take our government and you divide it unilaterally amongst federal and state governments. And then the portion allotted to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. So then the division of power between federal and state governments is then split up into separation of powers and checks and balances. So you really have a double check, a double security, C calls it, right? You split it unilaterally, and then you put specific checks and balances on each level of the government. All right. There are two methods of providing against us. Okay, so now he's going to start talking about factions. He talked about factions in Federalist 10, right? How are we going to prevent? Again, the whole idea is, the Federalists want this powerful national government because they believe it's going to create a stronger national government, which is necessary, but it's also going to allow for different limits on government, right? Limited government and limitations on government. So in Federalist 10, he talks about factions, and he's going on to talk about factions here. Okay, so he's talking about basically how are we going to control factions. And as we know, the best way to control factions is allow many factions to compete. Okay. And then he goes on to talk about states and what if states had the power. Like, think about if Rhode Island were to separate from the Confederacy, what would happen to that state, right? They would be basically powerless, as he goes on to point out. Like, their government would be powerless, but yet, then in that situation, in small republics, the majority is much more likely to oppress the minority, right? So protection of minority rights, factions, allowing many factions to compete is going to limit the ability of the majority to oppress the minority. That's kind of his last point. So hopefully that makes sense. That's Federalist 51. He's talking about federalism. He's talking about checks and balances, separation of powers, and factions. Really, all that combined. So keep studying, keep preparing. Take care.